Welcome back to another session in databases. We were talking about the different models and we have stopped at the network model. So let's continue our journey into databases. Now we know that database is nothing but a collection of related data, and this data has to be used by someone. We don't just keep the data at some place and forget them. We want to use that data or we want to manipulate that data. In order for us to use that data, we have to interact with the database. And the interaction requires some language. We know that in order to interact with the computer, we need some language. We know that there are machine language, high level language, and so on and so forth. In the same way, when we think of a database management system, there are many users who are interacting with the databases. Some are involved in storing the data at appropriate places within the system. Others just want to see the results of some simple calculation or maybe complicated calculation, which are based on the data that are stored in the databases. And all of them have to interact with the database management system or DBMS. So, databases provide different languages as well as different types of interfaces so that variety of users or a category of users can interact with the data and they can query the data which are there within the database as well as they can update the data. Okay, so what does these database languages do? They help us to create the database. That's the first thing that you have to do it. Remember, without a database, you can't do anything. So first of all, you need to create the database. And once the database is created, we may have to maintain the database with some modification to its structure and so on and so forth. Okay. So these languages provide us a facility to specify the design of the data. In other words, you know very well, schema is nothing but the overall design. So when I say I'm creating the database, I have to specify the schema, how it's going to look like, and how am I going to do it. I'm going to use a database language to interact with that. That's not the end of it. The data that is stored in the database, I want to retrieve it for my usage. For example, your marks are there in the Mangalore University database, and if it is lying there, it's of no use. You must be able to query them. So you know very well, whenever the marks are, whenever the results are announced, you go to a specific website and then type your enrollment number to get the result sheet. And what is this that you are doing? You are going to the database, retrieving the data, and you are showing it back. And this is called as querying a database. And what is the meaning of saying query? Query is a question that you are asking. Query refers to a question that you ask. For example, I can ask a query to the database, show me all the students' name who have cleared the computer science paper during the last semester. Or I can also ask a query like, show me all the students who are coming to our college from Kerala. So this is a query that I'm asking. So when I ask a query, I'm going to get the result. So this is the same as you go to Google and type something. You are querying the Google for something and it's going to give you a result back. Apart from that, we may also have to update some data. For example, I have already asked you to give me the your a list of practicals that you have done so that I can conduct the internal examination and then update your internal marks which are stored in the database of Mangalore University. Okay, now let's look at the other thing that any language will do, and you know very well, any language is used for communicating. So that is the proper thing. Either you communicate with each other using your natural language, or you communicate with the machine using the different machine language. When I say communicate with the database, I want to retrieve the data from the database, add new data to the database, modify the existing data, and if I'm not happy with the data, I even want to delete it. Now, all these operations that you can think of doing with the database requires you to learn a language. So this is the language of the database, and you need to learn that particular language. We are going to see that during this particular course. The database languages are broadly classified into two categories. The word broadly is very important over here because there are other categories. There are actually four categories which are being used up. But in your syllabus as well as the book that you are referring, only two are being prominently shown. It does not mean that these two does not exist. They are there. Apart from that, there are two more are there. I will talk about this in the other class, but today I'm going to only discuss about the two major classes. So there are two classes. One is called as a data definition language, DDL in short, and the other one is called as data manipulation language, DML. DML, that is data manipulation language, is further divided into procedural and non-procedural. Now, before we venture into the details about this language, let's look at these two words. One is the definition, the other one is the manipulation. Hope you get the idea. So, defining means you are creating the structure. If you want to define something, you need to create the structure. So, suppose if you want to define the marks of a student, then you have to say what are the information that will be there in the marks of the student. So the name of the subject will be there, the minimum marks allotted for the subject, the maximum marks, and the marks obtained may be there. Okay, then you need to say what is the name of the subject, how many characters it will be there, whether it can have spaces, whether it can have special characters, whether it is just the code that you have to type. All these are defining. Maximum marks, what is the maximum and minimum? What is the range? Can I have minimum minus 50 as the marks? Is it allowed? What must be the range? Only even numbers are allowed here, or only odd numbers are allowed here? These are all definition. We are defining how the things will look like. So that is what is called as definition. We define something, we create something. Okay, so these recipes, you can create many good things like dosa and all those things. There are recipe will define how much salt has to be there, whether two onions has to be there, or whether two chilies has to be there. So this, they will define what are the things that must be there for a particular dosa or a curry or something. So that is the definition. You define what are the things that are required. In other words, we are defining how the table must look like, how many different columns will be there in the table, and what values can be there in individual columns. And these are all definitions. Once you define the data, you are going to add the data into it. Sometime you may want to modify it, other time you may want to delete it. That is all manipulation. You manipulate the data that are stored here. So before building a house, you build the blueprint of the house. And what is a blueprint? Blueprint is the definition of the house, how the house will look like. Then once the house is built, you may put the table at one corner, you may move the table to the other corner, and so on. So you are all doing physics experiments. So in physics experiment, what is the first thing that you do? You first connect the circuits. Okay, and after that you start varying the voltages. That is manipulation, creating the circuit is nothing but defining how the things will look like. Okay, and changing the voltages, changing the current, changing the temperature, all are manipulation. Hope you get the idea between data definition and manipulation. We will see the details about data definition and data manipulation. So let's start with the data definition. So data definition language, in short they are called as DDL, are used to define the structure or schema of the database. So we define how the database will look like, how many tables will be there, what is the structure of the table, how one table is related to the other. So these contains the statements that are used to define the structure, to hold a specific type of records. So I've already told you, if you are staying marks, if you want to store the record of all the marks of the student, then how many fields will be there in that record? Okay, how these are connected to the other record, how the marks of the student is connected to the details of the student, that is name and other details of the student. Apart from that, we can also specify the integrity constraint. I'm going to talk about the integrity constraint in depth in the other slides, so I will not spare the time in explaining what is the integrity constraint as of now. As I go forward, I will explain about that. Okay, so there are some databases in which there is a clear separation between the conceptual and the internal views. Again, hope I have already told you that question is very important. Which are the different views, or which are the different abstraction that is there in the data level? So we know that internal view or the physical view is where you store the you use how the data is actually stored. Above this, you have conceptual view, which is the logical view. Now, in some databases, there is a clear definition between the conceptual level and physical level. If you find such a database management system, then data definition language is used only to specify the conceptual schema. So hope you know that there is a physical schema, that is internal schema, and we have the above this we have the logical schema. Okay, and then we have views. Again, recall that thing. If you are not very familiar with that, watch the video, the previous video, where I have discussed about this particular architecture, and this is important from the examination point of view also. So the databases where there is a clear separation between the language that is used for creating logical or conceptual schema and physical schema, DDL refers to creating the conceptual, not the physical. Okay, if at all you want to say how the physically how the data has to be stored, what must be the structure of the data and so on, for that there is a separate language called as storage definition language. In short, it is called as STL. That is used to specify the internal structure. So STL, or storage definition language, will give you, or if at all you want to tell the database system, this is how you are supposed to store it inside the uh, hard disk, or this is how you have to store it inside a tape and so on. If you want to specify that, you need to use storage definition language. So this is used to specify the structure of storage and how to access them from your hard disk. How do you access the content from your disk? That detail, if you want to specify, for that you have to use a storage definition language. Okay, generally these contains very high end details which are generally hidden from the users. So as a user who is using the database, you don't generally see them, unless and otherwise you are a person who wants to know more and more about the database system, then only you venture into the storage definition language. Okay, uh, in most of the cases, this particular most of the DBMS system that you use today there is no specific language which will perform the role of a storage definition language. That means you don't get something, a special set of functions or special set of language that will do that thing. Okay, so generally whenever you in want to do something on the storage, how the information has to be stored and so on and so forth, you don't get a language like a ddl or something like this. Then how do you store them? So if you don't have any languages to interact with the system, how do you store them? There will be built-in functions. You have to call those functions and pass some parameters to it. For example, if you really didn't get it, you have used square root as one function. Hope everybody knows that. And you supply some values to it. These are the parameters. So similarly, there are some functions which are directly available. You need to call those functions and then specify some values to it. Okay, these are generally used by the database administrator, DBA. I will talk about how many different types of users are there in the database later. So DBA is usually using it to create indices and maybe mapping that index with the different storage that is there in the database. Now let's look at the views. We have the physical layer. You know that there is a physical layer, there is a conceptual layer, and there are views. Again, this is a very important diagram from the point of view of examination as well as for your rest of the life. So if for creating the views, okay, there is something called as view definition language, VDL. Again, VDL is a data definition language because you are creating the data, you are creating the schema of it. Okay, what do they do? View help us to map our views with the conceptual schema. Okay, in general we are using ddl itself. These specific languages are not there. The commands which are used in the ddl itself are used to define the conceptual schema. In particular, if you are using RDMS, RDMS stands for Relational Database Management System. The one that I told you to install, Oracle, is actually RDBMS. In that, we are using SQL, a language called as SQL, Structured Query Language. More about it in some other time. So SQL, we are using this word SQL, which is very important. So most of the students think that SQL is of no use. You think that C, Java, C Sharp, PHP, all these things are very important in life. It is not. If you look at the top 5 languages, one of them will be SQL. SQL is a language that you need to learn. It is also called as SQL. You can call SQL or SQL in short. Again, it stands for Structured Query Language. I will talk about it in the other. We will look at them in the during this course. So this SQL is used to create views, and we will see how to create a view during this course. Now let's summarize what we have learned about data definition language. So data definition language is used by the database administrator. So generally it is used by the database administrator. Who is this database administrator? You know, who is an administrator? Administrator who is a person who administers, who controls the thing. For example, we have principal. Principal of this college is an administrator who will control the all the activities which are being performed in the college. Okay, similarly, there is a set of persons who are called as database administrator who will decide what structure the database must have, who can access it, and so on and so forth. So this creating the structure is a work of people who are involved in administering it. Okay, so data definition language is used by this administrator to create the design, the various schemas which are there in the various schemas of databases. Now Hope everybody is familiar with the idea of a compiler. I don't know whether you are familiar with the compiler. So you wrote a program in C, so or C++. So this is what happened. This program was converted into a sort of a machine language, which is a binary. How did that happen? It happened because there is something called as a compiler. I don't know whether you are familiar with that. So you created a program, C or C++, compiled it to machine language. In the same way, you are creating DDL, and there will be a DDL compiler that compiles it not into machine language, it compiles into the a form that is understood by the database. Okay, so it is not the machine language that it is doing. So when you create your data definition language, when you use data definition language to specify the design, how you write a C program to C language to create a program. In the same way, we use DDL for creating the schema. So the compiler will understand that, and it is going to store the output of the compilation in a special place called as database dictionary. So it's going to place it, it's also called as a database catalog. Okay, so whatever you create, whatever structure that you create, it will be stored in a data dictionary or DBMS dictionary that contains the details about how the table is created, what is the structure of the tables, how many columns will be there, what are the data types of individual columns, and how one table is related to the other. All these detail, how many indexes will be there, and so on and so forth. These details will be stored in a data dictionary. Now uh, this information about what the data must be there. For example, if you say that I am going to store the register number of the student, then you have to say what is the data type of register number. Is it integer, is it float, is it long, is it short? Have you heard about that in your C programming language? Long, short, and so on. So what is the data type? So I'm asking about that. What is the data type? Not what is the data. What is the data type? Is it binary? Is it decimal? Is it hexadecimal? What is it? So what is the type of it? Okay. So in other words, you know that 1010 is a data. What I am asking is what is the type of that data? So this is data about the data. So suppose if you say that uh, I am going to store the name of the student, then somebody is going to ask you, how are you going to store? What will be the length? Is it just 25 characters, or can you have 100 characters? Is space allowed, or what additional things are there? So we are asking. So for example, we may have say Nayana as one student. So you may have, this is the data. Nayana, if one student is there, this is the data. But I am not asking about what is the data, what is the value. I am asking how many characters will be there. Is it a string? Is it a integer? Is it a character? That data about the data. So Nayana is the data, but I am asking how many characters will be there. We integer, float, is a decimal point is allowed, and so on and so forth. That means I am asking data about the data. Remember, if you say that this is a string of 25 characters, so what you are saying is you are giving the data about a data. Understood? If you say that this is a long integer, so if you say that register numbers are long integer, what you are giving? You are giving me a data about register number. So that means it is the data about the data. So data about the data is called as metadata. Remember that. What is, if somebody asks you What is a metadata? Metadata is data about the data. Okay. So for example, if you say my age is 17 years, okay, I am asking, is this 17 integer or long or float or double? I am asking about that. So this is the data, but I am asking data about the data. If you say it is int, then it is the data about the data. Int is, or integer is, data about the data. 17 is the data. What kind of data you are asking, what type of data you are asking, that is called as metadata. Remember that data about the data is called as metadata. So when you use data definition language, and when you compile the data definition language, the compiler will store this metadata inside the data dictionary. So remember that. What the compiler will do? Compiler will, which compiler? Not your C compiler or C++ compiler. The DDL compiler will compile your data definition language into a metadata, which it is going to store in the data dictionary. Hope everybody got this concept. Okay. So now the question comes, how will this data dictionary look like? So is some of you have studied C programming or C++. Is it an object? Is it a class? Is it a struct? In a C program you have something called a struct, enumeration, and so on and so forth. What is it? Okay, in general, if you are using relational database. So data dictionary, okay, is also a table. Hope everybody is familiar with the table. So table is nothing but something that consists of rows and columns. Okay, it is also a table, but it's a special type of table. Okay, that is generally used by the system. Okay, it is not used by us who are using the data. We use the data, but not the data about the data. So if I ask the database, give me the marks of the student who have scored more than 75 in computer science, then I am asking for the data. But your database management system must know that marks are integer, or is marks floating point number, is negative marks are allowed. All these are the data about that marks, and that is data about the data, and this information is stored in a special type of table called as data dictionary. Okay, so whenever the data is read or written into the table, whenever you store 25, 35 or anything onto your table, the real data that you store or retrieve, the system will always consult the data dictionary. So data dictionary is a very, very important part of your database system, because it stores the data about the data. It will describe the data. Okay, for example, if you have a table, how many columns will be there in that table? Who is going to store that information? Is it 1 column, 2 column, 10 column, 15 column? How many total number of columns will be there? That information is stored in the data dictionary. Hope you get the idea. So your structure itself is stored in one table, that is called as data dictionary. Now, as I've told you, there are many constraints that you add to the database, and these constraints are implemented using data definition language. Some of the constraints are domain constraint, referential constraint, assertion, and authorization. All these things can be implemented, or that can be applied using a data definition language. Let's start with the individual constraints. So we'll start with the domain constraints. So what is domain constraint? What is the meaning of saying domain? As a mathematics students, you must always know this. So you say I is let or you don't use the word in maths, people don't use the word I, they use the word x. Let x belongs to set of integers. Hope you have done this thing. So what is the meaning of it? X can take all possible values of a integer, or you in mathematics you say let y belongs to a set of reals. So that means y can take all the values of a real. So in other words, y belongs to a domain. So domain is nothing but possible value. What are the possible value y can take? So if I say x belongs to set of integer, then x value cannot be 3.5. You cannot do that thing. Why it is not 3.5? Because zero point 0.5 is not allowed in the integers. So what are the possible values that a particular field can have? Suppose if you have a table, suppose if you have a table with a lot of columns, so what are the possible values that can be there in a given column? So this is the domain. All the possible values a particular attribute can take is called as a domain of the uh, attribute here. For example, I'll give you a simplest example. Now, if these are the states of India, if you have these are called as or y state, these are called as city of India. So you are putting all the cities of India here. You can write Bangalore, you can write Mysore, you can write Mangalore, but you cannot write New York. New York is hope. New York is not a city in India. So there are some crazy people out there who will just rename their city as New York. Then what to do? Hope nobody has done that thing in India. So New York is not a city in India. So this does not belong to the domain of cities of India. Hope you get that thing. Okay. Suppose if you are studying the computer languages, okay, so these are computer languages, then you can say C, C++, Java, and so on, but you cannot say Hindi, English, Marathi, and other. This is not this language. This is a language, no doubt, but it does not belongs to computer science or computer languages. So in other words, it does not fit into the domain of computer languages. So what is domain? The possible values. Okay. Again, just to give you an analogy, suppose if you are storing the denomination. I hope you know what is the meaning of denomination. So denomination is all the currencies that you can have. So you have 1 rupee coin, you have the 2 rupee coin. Okay, once upon a time 2 rupee notes were there, now they are missing altogether. You have 5 rupees coin as well as 5 rupee notes are there. You have 20 rupees coin and 20 uh, rupees coin. I don't know whether it is there or not. Okay, 20 rupees notes are there, I've seen. And but you don't have 35 rupees coin or 35 rupees note. So 35 does not belong to the this domain. Hope you get the idea. So domain means all possible values. In your case, suppose if I take your marks card and if I want to check your marks in computer science, so you may have the possible marks from 0 to 125 or 150 or maybe 100 depending upon what you are writing. So that is the domain. So if somebody says that my marks is 990 in computer science, then that mark is not acceptable because the maximum marks is either 125 or 150. You cannot go beyond that. So that even though it is an integer, So even though 999 is an integer, nobody can deny it. So what are the possible? These are all integers, but not all the integers are allowed here. This is called as a domain constraint. Hope you get this idea. So domain constraint are all the possible values that are associated with it. Okay. For example, if I ask you for the gender, so you may say male or female or transgender. You cannot say why as my gender. Such gender does not exist. Okay, so it does not belong to the category, or it does not belong to the domain. Hope you get that thing. Okay, so let's continue. So domain constraints are most elementary form of constraint that you are using. So they are tested by the system whenever you enter a new value. So whenever either you modify a value or enter a value, system will always check whether it belongs to the domain. And if there is a domain constraint, it will validate the domain constraint. If the value that you are adding, it violates the constraint that are being put for the domain, system will not accept it. So that's a very, very important thing. Okay. Just remember that the garbage data is worse than having no data. That is a very, very important thing. If you don't trust the data, then there is no point in storing that data. And that's a very, very, very important thing. Sometimes what happens is we know that the data is corrupt, and nobody will believe in that particular data anymore. It just becomes waste, because the data itself may not be reliable. So most of the time we would like to ensure that data that is stored in the database are valid with respect to some domain. Now let's look at the other type of constraint, and these are called as a referential integrity constraint. Now what is this referential integrity is? They are usually used when the data is referring. So the word itself says referential, means that the data refers to something else. Okay, in that case we use the referential integrity. Let me explain it with the help of an example. Now we have an employees here, many employees are there, and they are working in different department. For example, the John Smith is working in the department number 13. And what is this department number 13? This is the employee details that I have. So if I want to know, I will have to go to the department, and in the department 13 is marketing. Okay. Now if you take Mary here, and she is working in the department accounts. Yes. Now if you notice over here, this particular data is referring to the other data. So it is actually referring to the data which is there elsewhere. There are two tables are there. One data in one table or attribute of one table is referring to the attribute in the other table. Suppose by mistake somebody deletes this record. So then what happens? Then here Mary is working in a department 14, and somebody asks what is department 14. There is no such records here, so they will say that there is no such records that are available. So during the examination you write the examination paper code like BSc CS 101, something like that. Okay, this is the code. Suppose when you write this code, if this code is not matching, what will happen? You will not be able to take up the test, because that course is not available. So this number actually refers to something else in other table. Okay, this is called as referring. So it refers to something. Now when the data in one attribute or one column is referring to the other column, the database must ensure that both the referred column and the referring column, the data is proper. Now, it may not be possible for us to use the domain constraint here because the data belongs to somewhere else. In this case, null means nothing in our case. So, Jane here is working in a null department. Null means nothing. So that means she is not working in nothing. So is it a valid thing? It's not valid. So this type of problem is called as integrity test. For example, you have brought an item from Amazon or somewhere else, and somebody suddenly deleted that item from the list. So when your item is not working, you go and ask the Amazon, say I brought this item, then they will ask you for the item code. When you say item code is 14, they say that no such item exists in our database. I don't know how you got that item. Okay. So this kind of things should not happen. And in order for us to prevent that, we use a referential integrity constraint. So when we use the referential integrity, we ensure that all the references are valid. Okay, so this happens when a value of one attribute in one relation is nothing but a table, one column of a one table is referring to another column of some other table. Okay, whenever such a thing, whenever you make changes, if the references are not proper, then it will create a violation, and when such a violation occurs, the database will not accept such changes. Let's go to the next one. Next one is the assertion. Now, assertion is slightly a special form of domain constraint and referential constraint. Now, most of the time, you cannot put the domain or referential constraint in all the situation. For example, if you have a department, then the department must have at least 5 courses. Otherwise, such a department does not exist in the university. These are constraints that are put by the university. Or a student, if at all you want to call somebody as a student, must have enrolled for at least 3 subjects. These are some assertion. If there is a student, there must be there. A account in the bank must have a minimum of 500 rupees. This is assertion. If it is there, 500 rupees minimum value must be there. I cannot put a domain constraint there because account can have any amount, which are integer or real numbers. And if there is some amount, 20 rupees are there, that the referential integrity will work. I cannot put a referential integrity. In this case, I have to put a assertion. Assertion will check whether the put assertions are proper. For example, all the people who are there in the voters ID list must have the age more than 18 years. So otherwise, your name cannot come in the voters list. So this is an assertion. If your name is there in the voting list, that means it is assumed that you are 18 years old. So this kind of constraint that you want to put, then you can go for assertion. Now the next one is about the authorization. Now you know that many different people can use the data, and if everybody, now you know that we have a WhatsApp group, and if I make every one of you as an administrator, and you know what's going to happen then. So there must be some people who will just see, and there are some groups in which the members can't post anything, they can just see what is going on. Okay. For example, university and other, there are many official WhatsApp groups are there in which only the people who are supposed to put the message are allowed to put the message. Others can only see, or others, if they don't want to see, they can exit it, but they can't exit such a group because it's an official group. Otherwise, what will happen is everybody will start posting hello, good morning, good night, and happy birthday, and happy new year and kind of messages, and this is going to simply clutter. So what the administrators generally do is they will not allow everybody to send the message. They can only see the message. It's like a notice board. You have seen the notice board in college. You can just read the notices, that's all. You can't correct the notices. You can't say I have seen the notice. Nothing can be done. It is read only. So you want, you read it. Okay, yeah, you don't want, you don't see the notice form. So simple as that. So here we are putting some constraint on the user. So who can put the notice on the notice board? Who is authorized to put the notice on the notice board? So in the same way, who is authorized to do something on the database? This is called as this is a constraint, and this constraint is the authorization constraint. Okay, so authorization constraint can be read authorization. That means you can just read the content. So read only, you can't make modification. Insert means you can add the new data, you can insert new records, but you can't modify the existing one. You can just add a new record and nothing can be done. So you know very well, in your Aadhaar card, sometimes your spelling is mistake. So if you go them, they say it is not possible. I can't do anything. I can insert a new record, I can add a new Aadhaar card, but I can't modify that card. To modify that card, there is other procedure. So that is insertion. Update authorization means you can modify, you can make changes. Delete means you can delete the content. So modification does not mean you can delete it. You can modify it, but you can't delete it. Okay, these are different types of constraint that you can put on the databases, and these are all expressed using data definition language. Let's look at the other type of language, and that is the data manipulation language, DML. Okay, this, the word itself says this is used to manipulate the stored data or access the data which is stored in the database. So data manipulation means you are trying to retrieve the data which is there in the database. You are trying to modify the data which is there in the database, or you can even delete the data which is there in the uh, database. Remember, to modify, to insert, or to delete, you must have the permissions. So if you are not authorized to do that, you can't do it. Okay, so that's very important. And how do I give the authorization? To give an authorization, I have to use data definition language. Remember, data definition is used to define that you are authorized to add the new data, modify the new data, delete the new data, and so on. Data manipulation is used to actually add the data or modify the data or delete the data. So you may tend to modify the data. So when you look at your marks on Mangalore University website, you may be tempted to change all the marks to 100 out of 100, but you are not authorized to do so. Okay, so what you are doing there is you are using data manipulation language, wherein you try to retrieve the data, but you are not given an access to modify or delete the data which is there in the database. Okay, there are two types of data manipulation languages are there. One is called as the procedural, other one is called as a non-procedural. So what is procedural and what is non-procedural? A procedural means you have to say to the database what data you are interested in and how to fetch that data. So it's like you write a program in which you have to write all the codes of creating the integer array, floating array, and all these things. Entire procedure you have to write. So you have to specify, I want the student name, I want the register number, I want all these things, and how to extract this. That also you have to write. You have to write the procedure, how to extract that data. This is called as procedural. In the non-procedural, also called as declarative DML, you just tell the database that I want you to give me the student name, student marks, student roll number. How to retrieve it, you don't specify. Database system or DBMS will do that thing for you. Okay, so the non-procedural DML, that is declarative or also called as high-level DML, are used to specify some complex operation precisely. So it doesn't mean that you have to have the programming knowledge. You can just ask the database, give me some data, and it's going to retrieve the data and give it. Most of the time, the database management system will provide you a interactive means, or either in a terminal or maybe on a web page that you've seen in the previous my installation, wherein you can interactively retrieve, modify the data without even knowing about the programming or anything. You can easily extract the data. So there we are not really interested in what is the procedure for retrieving it. That's why it is non-procedural. However, if you are using the low end, that is procedural DML, then you have to know everything. Generally, the data manipulate the high level or non-procedural language is interactively used. There will be a terminal wherein you can type the commands and you can get the result back. However, you can also write the non-procedural command inside a programming language and then retrieve it. For example, if you have Java or C++ or any other programming language, you can write this non-procedural codes within your programming language to retrieve the data from the database. Or you can have an interactive way wherein you can type the command and get the instant result using a terminal. However, when we talk about the low level or procedural DML, wherein you are supposed to write the procedure, in this case, you usually cannot interactively use these commands on a command prompt or any other place. You will have to embed these codes or these languages inside other programming languages like C++, Java, PHP, or any other programming language. Okay. In these kind of programming language, what you do is next year you are going to study about Visual Basic or something, wherein you are going to extract a set of records from the database, and at a time you are going to take one record and manipulate it. So you first go to the database, retrieve a set of records and pick one record. It's like an array of records, and take one element. How you manipulate the array? So first you create array with all the numbers, then at a time you take one element out of the array and then start manipulating it. The same idea that you are also using. So these are sometimes called as record at a time DML, because you are extracting one record at a time and doing it. Most of the time you do it using either a looping construct like for loop or while loop. You put those loop, retrieve one record at a time, do the needful processing, and then proceed. So this is how it goes. Now the other thing that you must know is about a query. I've already told you, query is nothing but a question. It's a statement requesting the database to retrieve some information. For example, if I ask the database, give me all the students who have taken Hindi as their language. So this is the question that I am asking, and in a technical word, this is called as a query. Okay. Whenever we are using DML to retrieve the information, we usually say we are querying the database, and the language that we are using is a query language. A SQL that you are using, SQL, is a querying language. Okay, so query is a high-level data manipulation language that is used to retrieve the data. Okay, and we don't say how to retrieve or what is the procedure that is used. We just say that give me the student names, give me the register number, give me their marks. That's all. How to retrieve that data, we don't have to write the entire procedure. That's why it is a declarative statement. So this is all for today, and I would like to talk something about your installation. Hope everybody has installed your Oracle on your machine. Now, in the last class, I told you that you can double click on this to start working. Now, what happens is if you double click on it, by the way, before you start doing it, you will have to go and start the database. So, very, very important thing. I told you, you have to start the database, and once you click on start the database, this is what you are going to see. Okay, you're going to see that the database, it's going to show dot 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 and it's a Oracle service has started. If this is not coming, that means your Oracle is not running, and then onwards nothing is going to happen. Okay, so when you start it, it's going to show like this: starting services dot dot dot. It will take some time, and then it says Oracle service has successfully started. So you will have to go and start the database. It is there inside the Oracle. Hope in the last class I've shown you. You have to go to the Oracle, HIJKLNNOP. Okay, so you have it here, and you will get the start and stop databases. You can do that thing. So once you start it, then if you double click on this a particular shortcut, it's going to come here. Now, in this case, you can't do anything, because if you try to click this particular place, application express, okay, it's going to ask you login if you type BSc and the password that you have typed. And if you do that thing, you will notice that you are not allowed to do anything. Some of you may be very disgusted with that particular thing. The reason is at this point, you have to, you can only, if you click on here, you have to type system and the password that you have typed. Okay. Then you can log in. Okay. This is for system login. Now, I'm not going to do that. Now, if at all you want to work with the BSc, you have already created this BSc workspace. Suppose if you want to do that, then just go to this location. So when you double click, I will just show you that. When you double click on this icon, I will minimize this. When you double click on this icon, it will take you to that place. That is not this one, this place. Now from here, from your URL, just remove this F question mark and other thing. Just remove this part. Just keep apex, only up to apex. Just keep up to apex. So 127.0.0.1 colon 8080 slash apex, and just press enter. When you do that, I'm going to just minimize. You're going to come to this application express. There you can log in into your workspace as BSc and just click on. Everything is going to work fine. So always remember that. So next time, for the first time you create the user, next time just go to the apex and do it. This is not the first time. The second time onwards you just do it. Now here you notice you have a place called as SQL workshop. You can click on that and write the structured query language. Okay, so you notice that there are some tables are there which are having underscore, dollar underscore history and so on and so forth. These are the tables that are required by the database. Okay, so I want to run the SQL command. So I'm going to go here, and I have clicked on, by the way, I just clicked on SQL command. And if I want to create my own table, how to do that? Okay, let me go to the table here. And if you look at the my place over here. So if you look at this particular thing, you have all those things. Now if you want to, if you go to this workshop, okay, you will notice that you have some tables, recently created tables, and you can also, where is that? I think I'm going to use this particular thing. I'm going to run this query. Okay, you can to show you, not this one. I think I can type that query instead of wasting my time. Okay, I'm going to just click on here, and I'm going to click on this and just run it. You notice there are a lot of tables are there. This is a table. You notice that table. Can I create my own table? The answer is yes, you can create your own table. How do I create my table? To create a table, you just type create table, okay, followed by the name of the table. So name of the table, I'm going to say student, okay, and how many columns will be there? You have to specify. For example, register number as number. You have to just say that, and yes name as varchar. I'll talk about this 25. Okay, I'm just trying to create a table. Okay, and if I run it, and it's going to show me the table is created. Don't worry about it, I will talk about it slightly later. So I have created a table. Now creating a table, that means I've designed a table, okay, and this is called as data definition language. So you have defined the data. Hope you get that idea. You have defined something. You have created the structure of the table. I'm going to use the previous command and just run it to just show you that I have a table which was not there last time, and this table name is called as student. Hope you get that thing. Now, if I want to insert some value into this table, then I have to use data manipulation. I am inserting something. So I'm going to say insert into students. Did I use students or student? I want to see the name. Okay, student. And I want to insert the values. Don't worry about this command. I will explain this command. The register number is 1.1 and the name is money. Okay, so I have done that. I'm going to run this, and you notice that one row inserted. It's going to show me that one row inserted. Okay, if you want to, this is the data manipulation. I am trying to manipulate. If I want to view the data, this is also manipulation. So I'm going to say select star from student. Don't worry, again, don't worry about the commands. I will explain the commands later. I'm going to just run it, and it's going to show me that this table is a very short table with the register number and name, and it has one record inside it that has been added. Hope you get that thing. So which one is DDL and DML? More about this in our next class. So thank you for your interest. We will meet again in the next class.